Okay, in this video tutorial we're going to talk quickly about food poisoning. So, did you know there are millions of bacteria on your kitchen bench, or say even probably more on your kitchen sponge or things like that, and there are probably significantly less on your toilet seat. But which one would you rather eat off? Well, I'm sure everyone would say the kitchen bench or a sponge or something from the kitchen rather than the toilet seat. And you're right, it probably is safer to avoid eating off the toilet seat. But even though there are more bacteria in and around your kitchen, the majority of them are harmless. So it's not just about the number of bacteria. So food poisoning especially isn't just about the number of bacteria. It's also about the type. When you eat yogurt, you're eating millions and millions of bacteria. But at the same time, those bacteria are not bad for you. In fact, they're probably even good for you. So even though there are only a few bacteria on the toilet seat, some of those are much more likely to be very harmful bacteria. So I guess in this little video tutorial, I just want to pose the question, what makes some bacteria harmful, whereas others aren't harmful? Well, it comes largely down to this. Harmful or disease-causing bacteria are known as pathogens. So pathos was, I think, the Greek god of death. So patho is death and disease. So pathogens are the things that cause death and disease. Pathogenic bacteria, essentially, they usually produce toxins. And it's these toxins that actually make us feel sick. So they can cause inflammation, which is the swelling, the reddening of certain tissues, and often a lot of foodborne toxins essentially cause diarrhea and vomiting, and that's also partly a mechanism of the body to try and get rid of the toxin. Now, one really important thing to note here is that even once even if food is spoiled and you cook it, you can kill off all the bacteria, but the toxins can persist. And that's why we don't simply cook food once it's gone bad. We actually throw it away. So you can imagine if you had a pizza and it was left out and it had gone a bit moldy and a few bacteria growing on it and things like that. You can't just whack it in the microwave for a good 10 minutes. Yes, you probably kill all the bacteria and fungi, but the toxins will still remain, and that could still give you a nasty case of food poisoning. So the vast majority of bacteria are not harmful. So in fact, a lot of them are actually beneficial. They're actually good for us. And that's because they compete with the toxin-producing bacteria. So to some extent, the larger the number of good bacteria or bacteria that aren't harmful that are in your body, it makes it a little bit more difficult for the pathogenic bacteria to actually cause you any damage or to infect parts of your body, because they have to compete with those good bacteria. So the problem is, though, that bacteria can reproduce very quickly. And in science, sometimes that's useful. We can use bacteria to make copies of DNA and things like that, because they can reproduce and copy themselves very quickly. But that also is the reason why if a food is stored in the wrong conditions, if it's warm, moist, if it meets all those sorts of criteria, then bacteria can grow very, very quickly. And as the number of bacteria increase, the number of toxins will increase, pretty quickly too, just behind that. So it's worth noting here that toxins, for a lot of bacteria, they secrete the toxins. They may be a waste product that the bacteria are producing. In some cases, they're actually a substance that's found in the membrane, in the surface of the bacteria. So these toxins can also be found in the surface of bacteria. But it's these that usually what give us the actual food poisoning or make us sick. So it is possible potentially to eat a food where the bacteria have been killed, but if the toxin's already present, you're still going to get sick or not feel so well. So I thought an interesting case of food poisoning you may have heard of is salmonella. And salmonella can cause fever and diarrhea, vomiting, dehydration, and abdominal pain, so a sore tummy. And the diarrhea and dehydration can actually be very severe, and that can actually kill. There have actually been some instances where people have died from salmonella poisoning. Usually that's elderly or people who are weakened for other reasons, have a weaker immune system for other reasons. But it can be quite a severe disease. So a lot of people, you're probably aware of the connection between salmonella and chicken. And lots of people talk about if chicken is improperly cooked and if it's pink inside, that you could get salmonella. The truth is actually that salmonella as a bacteria actually doesn't tolerate high temperatures very well. It actually has quite a narrow temperature range within which it can grow and even survive. So normally if chicken's cooked, and it's cooked enough that it's not raw on the inside, so if it's actually edible, if the meat is actually cooked through and the meat itself isn't raw, if it actually looks edible, it's probably killed off the salmonella. And it's interesting, most cases of salmonella poisoning, the chicken is the source of the salmonella, but most people actually get salmonella poisoning from other foods, especially things like coleslaws and salads, and especially sort of barbecue summertime when you're sort of eating out. And the reason for that essentially is that chicken's been prepared using utensils or chopping boards, and then those utensils or chopping boards haven't been washed properly, and then other foods such as salads and things that aren't cooked are prepared on those chopping boards. And that essentially means that even though there's only a small number of bacteria introduced to those foods, because they're not cooked, if they're stored in the fridge or in a chili bin, which may not quite be cold enough, the bacteria numbers can start to increase, produce the toxin, and that's where people actually get sick. So the chicken, because it's usually cooked, and because people don't usually like eating chicken that's fairly raw, most of the time the salmonella is killed. Now, I'm not recommending, you eat raw chicken, or if it's undercooked, cook it a bit longer. But it's interesting that a lot of salmonella poisoning often comes from cross-contamination, where the bacteria has actually come from the chicken, but has been introduced to a food that isn't cooked. I've also mentioned an interesting case of food poisoning was this idea that essentially during the Salem Witch trials, there may have been a mold growing on the wheat that produced a toxin similar to ecstasy or had a hallucinogenic effect. And that's possibly why people were behaving a little bit strangely, and may be one of the reasons why, particularly in that area in Salem, why there were so many witches, people accused of being a witch and trialed. So just an interesting case there that food poisoning may have contributed, may have been a culprit. So that's it for this little video tutorial. Just an idea of some key terms there. Pathogen is any disease-causing bacteria. And disease, interestingly, disease is a fairly loosely defined term. I always thought, some things, is it a disorder? Is it a disease? Is it, the term disease is basically, can really be applied to almost anything that has a negative impact on our health or well-being. So disease is a very loosely used term. So basically, pathogenic bacteria or pathogens are disease-causing bacteria that do us some harm. Cool, yeah, that's about it.